ABC, always be capturing. As we go through this process, we'll talk about we're always writing stuff down. When we start this process, we come into a room with clean, unfettered walls. It's pretty incredible what the room looks like when we're done. It's like every freaking space is just filled with stuff that we've captured. And what's great about that is it's like a group brain.
There's lots of bad habits that happen within an organization, especially around communication, sharing of ideas, understanding what is the North Star. Don't follow a methodology that allows more collaboration, people to come together, talk about it, make decisions together. So then the designer can ask more important questions that has to do with the product versus spinning again more in circles and just taking longer and extending that. So everybody, welcome to the Make an Impact, the User Inexperience podcast. I'm your host, Makoto Kern, and with me I've got Scott Harden, as you well know him as the chief troublemaker, not the troublemaker, chief troublemaker.
The chief troublemaker.
So Scott and I have been involved in many strategy sessions with clients. This all revolves around redesigning or creating new software products, mainly enterprise, but we've worked with mobile applications, web applications. It could be, I don't know how many different industries we've touched, but there's always a need that we've seen throughout our years as UX designers to incorporate not just the user, but also business, understand the constraints of development, but consider the whole thing with the business and the product and the users holistically before you start building products. So we, over the course of the last several years, have refined our process in which we involve our clients and their leadership to really strategize up front what they should be building, what's the importance, what the risks are, what the priorities are. And this is what this podcast is about today. And Scott is my main man when he's the guy that helps facilitates these. We're not going to call them workshops. We're going to call them immersion sprints because workshops always have a bad rap. But what we do, we actually do something amazing in a short period of time. And I think this is a good way for you to kick us off, Scott, with kind of a little bit about what you think the immersion is and what we do.
Yeah, thanks, Makoto. So I'm Scott Harden. I'm the chief troublemaker of Impact. And I probably got that moniker because back in the day, we would typically, and when I say we, I mean product development, user experience industry agencies would typically start by coming into a client engagement with our notebooks open, and we would listen and hear about a lot of requirements, specifications from the client. And then we would go off into the shadows and do our work in a black box. And so I think that when the troublemaker moniker probably came on because I really saw an opportunity to disrupt that process and think about getting started on a project in a different way, a more collaborative way. A lot of what we talk about at Impact is how we can collaborate with clients. I tend to not like to put us in the us versus them mindset, but we're in this together. And, that's a cliche in a lot of ways, but we really try to live that example in the work that we do, that we are working together for the best customer outcomes with the products that we design. And so how do we do that? And the best way, I think, with a lot of trial and error is to talk about immersion with our clients in the problem and the opportunity and the outcome. And so we talk this process that we kick off with, we call it a product immersion sprint. And it's really, its purpose is really to inject strategic intention into the product development process. It really focuses on business and customer value, and it really talks about how to humanize the design experience and make the design experience as accessible as possible to the business. At Impact, we have a lot of designers that they've gone through design school, they've been taught the ways of design, And that's great. We have really capable designers. But a lot of times in that process, the process of design or the means by which designers operate is often a black box. And so what I've sought to do is really demystify design. Doesn't mean that everybody can be a designer. There's a lot of personal skill that goes into the process of designing. But demystifying the process of design into how designers think, how they go about solving a problem, how they do research is something that you can teach everyone to think like designers and to engage in a process that is intentional. And so the immersion sprint is really that process of bringing business leaders, product managers, technical people, marketing, sales, all into the box of thinking like a designer, being human-centered like designers are, and not worrying so much about failure. I think one of the things that I love about working with designers is they're courageous. They're excited about diving into the creativity and not being worried about failure in the beginning. A lot of the challenges I see with organizations is that they are so adverse to risk that they often spend more time than they should diving into exploration or taking those risks in the beginning because they're afraid of failure. And it's okay to be afraid of failure when the heat's on, when you ship a product into the market, when you take a product into the market. Obviously, having failure can result in some inconvenient outcomes. Heads will roll, possibly money is lost. So we embrace an early failure methodology where it's okay to take the initial risks in the beginning and validate those assumptions that we make and those risks that we take with the customers in the beginning.
What we've seen in traditional approaches with design, from basically concept to design to development, is that we know what we know, and let's just have the designer wireframe something up what we think users want, and then just start developing it, which can be very risky and very expensive. It's also a designer now becomes an order taker.
Yeah.
And for them to go around and ask every SME, every leader, hey, what do you think of this? Give me feedback. That can take months. And they could go around in circles, get frustrated, not know how to sell something. Maybe somebody who has a different opinion than somebody else, they're not talking to each other. There's lots of bad habits that happen within an organization, especially around communication, sharing of ideas, understanding what is the North Star. These things are common things that we see throughout organizations that have issues. And if you continue with that poor habits of building products, if you don't follow a methodology that allows more collaboration, people to come together, talk about it, make decisions together, and then as they move forward, there's a way in which everything is basically written down and agreed upon, so then the designer can ask more important questions that has to do with the product versus spinning again more in circles and just taking longer and extending that life cycle.
Yeah, I mean, I think a lot of the problem in agency work is there's a heavy, at least in sort of historically, there's this sort of mindset of we have to know everything and the requirements have to be defined before we can even start. And I think what we've been trying to do to disrupt that in the immersion sprint process that we have is we can start with what we know. We can embrace assumption making. Let's not get blocked by gaps in knowledge. And so what it said, what the process basically says is let's assemble as a team. I said earlier about this isn't just impact and the client, and we're sort of, impact versus the client. We're all one group, and let's come together and let's write the scope for the project we're about to engage in together. And what that does is it helps build a cohesive team, makes everyone feel like they've got voice, and builds camaraderie and collectiveness by doing this process.
And we're talking about shortening that process of spinning your wheels from weeks to months to just a few days. And I think,
absolutely. For sure.
I think that's an important point where we can accelerate the product development to a much quicker.
Yeah, we can get started. Absolutely. Yeah. Let's get started and let's get up to speed faster than we otherwise would if we're just having one-off conversations.
And we're able to, one of the things that I remember that, each one of these industries that we have implemented this sprint cycle or the sprint workshop is that, do you have inherent knowledge or experience, whether it's cybersecurity, energy, whatever it is, it's complicated. It can be complex, but with this type of immersion, we rely on the product owners or the company or the client to be the experts, the subject matter experts. We're the experts in UX. You tell us kind of what the need is and what the product is and what the users want, and then we figure out how to do it through the user.
I think you bring up a great point. One of the challenges that designers have, I think this is what you just talked about, which is we're not experts in the subject material. Sometimes we are, but often we aren't. We're experts in process. And so the client is the subject matter expert for the most part. I mean, they may have gaps in their knowledge too, but they know more about their industry than we do. And so what this process says is we designers are the purveyors of process, client is the purveyors of expertise, and let's come together and work together. And that way it takes a load off the designer to have to be this subject matter expert, because it's a charade if they say that they are. And so we're able to complement each other, the yin and yang of it, I guess, if you were to cliche an old Turner phrase. So it's complementary. It's symbiotic that way.
Yeah. And I think one of the interesting weaknesses that I've seen is where maybe a very heavily development-led process or company has, we just need a designer, maybe not that experienced, to put together some pretty wireframes. And what happens is that person becomes somewhat of a subject matter expert because they've been working with the client they've been working in that industry for a little bit with that company, maybe as their first one. But then what happens is that there's a lot of biases that are created. They don't have the experience to push back. They just start to wireframe everybody else's ideas until you have this amalgamation of this interface that's just loaded with every single feature you can think of, or it's just not optimized because they don't have the experience to understand, and they have the bias of just being in it for so long that they can no longer make unbiased decisions.
Absolutely. No, it's the way to go. So maybe let's do is talk a little bit about what immersion is from a structure and kind of agenda. And maybe Sounds to good. Kind of kick that off, I would introduce to people we assume everybody knows what design thinking is, but a lot of people have heard it before, but they don't really know, what it is from soup to nuts. How I would define that design thinking, which is really something that kind of came about out of different organizations such as the Nielsen Norman Group and IDEO, an early pioneer in this process, Stanford D School. But it's really it's a nonlinear process, but it's really the tenets of design thinking are problem solving through 5 phases of work. Empathy, putting ourselves in the mind of the users we're designing for, defining a problem, having a clear-cut idea of the problem that we're trying to solve. Ideating, which says, let's honor everyone's idea, build on each other's ideas. Let's get the ideas out of our heads and into the open sphere so that we can share the solutioning around, coming up with a solution to a problem. Prototyping. So when we talk about prototypes, we talk about what's the least amount of work we can do to know that we are heading down the right road. We'll talk about that later. And then testing, which is validating assumptions that we make. So that's design thinking in a nutshell. And And so when we talk about immersion, which honors that process, the approach of immersion at its core is if you've heard of the process of lean, which comes out of Six Sigma thinking and all of that, a lean methodology is essentially it's a process by which you define or you solve a problem by defining the problem, identifying a solution, uncovering a unique value proposition, understanding alternatives to solving the problem, having a high level concept, defining success, understanding, broader things like how much the solution is going to cost, what revenue streams are. That's a lot of business jargon that you'll hear. And then when you hear about design as it applies to kind of lean thinking, if you were to think of lean from that perspective, you would be asking questions like, what is the business problem? Or what is the business trying to achieve? What are the business outcomes that a business is trying to achieve by solving a problem? Who are the users involved in a solution? Like, who are we designing for? Goes back to that empathy piece. And what are the user outcomes? What benefits do the users get from the solution that we introduce? What is the solution? Defining that, of course. And coming up with a hypothesis for the value of the solution. This goes back earlier to what I said about not having all the answers right away. Let's make a guess. Let's create a hypothesis. Let's say if we do this, since we have this problem, if we do this thing, we will get the following business and customer benefit out of it. And that will give us this, this will allow us to succeed in specific ways. That's all a big hypothesis that we're coming up with. And lean UX thinking embraces that. And then to be able to validate the assumption that we made, what's the most important thing we need to learn first? And what is the least amount of work that we can do to learn that? So that's what they call, in a nutshell, a lean UX canvas. So what we're doing is wrapping all of that into a sprint that happens in a few days with impact and the client coming together and answering those questions that I just identified. And we call it immersion. And so if we talk about the agenda of the immersion process, and we've got a couple of examples we have on the screen. The first thing that we do when we engage with the client is to make sure we introduce ourselves. Whether this happens in person or it happens virtually, doesn't matter. We want to break the ice. So we'll do some activities, whether they be tell us something we don't know about you. Makoto, you've probably have some examples as well, but just breaking the ice in an interactive and engaging way with all of the people that are in front of us.
Just get them talking, because you're going to have different people who are either going to be very loud in the meeting or there's going to be ones that are very quiet. But we're trying to break that ice, because everybody in a group setting like that is probably not used to talking in front of everybody, especially when it's amongst your peers, and some could be amongst somewhat maybe your direct manager, but we're talking maybe even higher than that. It could be VPs and C-suites. So some could be intimidated. So we're really trying to encourage people to speak up.
Yeah. And so and that's fun because it gives everybody a chance to kind of, laugh a little, and that breaks the ice, and that's great. The next thing that we do is just talk about why we're doing this. Like I mentioned before, a lot of folks come to this thinking they know what these sessions are about. But we spell it out pretty plainly. First of all, we say, why we're doing this. What's the purpose of this immersion? And what are the desired outcomes from it? If we were to sit with you for 2 days, at the end of the day, what are the desired outcomes from the work? What we tell them is we're going to have business alignment. We're going to make sure that your business goals match, support your business objectives. We're going to make sure that we focus, that we uncover customer value. We're going to focus empathy on our customers and what they care about, and what discovery we need to do to validate the assumptions we're making. And then we're going to map priorities. We're going to come up with solutions. We're going to develop a backlog of initiatives, big bets, features, discoveries that will support the business objectives and the customer outcomes that we've identified. And so we make sure everybody understands that. And then we'll do some norming stuff, which is basically, here are the rules of the road in the work that we're going to do together. And with the common norms that we like to, establish are, let's be positive. Like I have this phrase that I say, relentless positivity. I'm a pretty optimistic guy by nature. And so I'm a glass half full kind of person. And it's like, we are the best people together to chart the future of this product or service that we're designing. So relentless positivity, we're in this together. We say this is a safe space to disagree. And that's an important point. I think, Makoto, you brought it up earlier, which is, there may be senior people in this meeting and there may be sub-senior people in this sprint. And so in normal conditions, normal corporate culture, it might be politically disadvantageous to disagree with your superior officer. And in this space, we try to level the playing field, right? So he's saying that this is a safe space for you to disagree with your boss, essentially. And it helps give people voice we're going to get to that alignment through this process, but we may talk about things where not everybody agrees, and that's okay. It's actually good if it's that way.
Yeah, I think one point too, just in general, we try to include 8 to 10 people is usually our number that we ask,
right?
But it always ends up being more that are invited, which is, it's fine as long as you don't have redundancies of people in there, because the more voices you have, the more conversations, and it just takes longer. So it's something that we always tell our clients, just get the bare bones, non-redundant type of positions in every different aspect of the business to partake in this, so they can all have a voice, but kind of limit it. Otherwise, you're going to have things, just the whole process take longer.
Yeah, totally. We'll probably drill in a little bit more on the types of people that should come to this session. But absolutely, we're in this together. It's a safe space to disagree. Another norm is nobody knows everything. Like together, we will fill gaps in knowledge as best we can. But embrace discomfort of the things we don't know the answers to, and we will get there together. So embrace the fact that not everybody in this room knows everything. And then, like I said before, and I'm going to say it 10 times more, embrace assumption making. Don't think that we can't move forward because we don't know all those answers. Let's make some guesses. We've been in this business long enough. And when I say we, I mean the client. The client has been in this business long enough to have some pretty broad assumptions about stuff. So let's run with that. And we'll correct those assumptions as we learn more later. We also ask them to stay engaged, whether this is a virtual or in person. Stay focused. Put those laptops down. Turn off the phones. And if you get a call or you've got to take an email or you've got to answer a text, we're here. We're going to keep going. Step out in the hallway and have that call. You got to, everyone has day jobs. So we respect that. We're going to keep going. Come on back when you're done. We'll catch you up and we'll keep moving. So take those distractions out. Let's stay focused and engaged. And then ABC, always be capturing. As we go through this process, we'll talk about, we're always writing stuff down. When we start this process, we come into a room with clean, unfettered walls.
As clean as that background.
I think we should show some pictures of what the room looks like when we're done. It's pretty incredible. It's like every freaking space in a conference room or wherever we're at is just filled with stuff that we've captured. And what's great about that is it's like a group brain, and we have everything out in the open. So always be capturing, even if you think it's a lame idea, write it down. And level understanding by minimizing, terms of art. What I mean by terms of art is, an acronym, PCI. What does that mean? For a cybersecurity expert, PCI is something that everyone knows, but maybe a designer doesn't know what PCI means. So minimize acronyms. Try to be deliberate in explaining something as though not everybody in the room knows the terms of art.
That's prior to, before we actually start, but that's day one. how we introduce
Yeah.
everybody to get into it. And then I say we just jump into kind of what that day one looks like.
Yeah. So day one is about, so there's really a 3-act structure to this process. And I'm going to avoid using the word day because different clients, we can roll this out in different ways, but I'll sort of say like module 1.
There you go.
Module 2 and module 3. And so, I come from the world of filmmaking, and a great story is a great cinematic story is a 3-act structure. And it's not any different in this case too. Like if this were a movie, the first act would be defining success for the business, defining business success. And so the first thing that we do is after the welcome is we start a process by which we say, what is the business objective? What's the problem we're trying to solve? And there's sort of a 4-part structure to that. And the first part is, what are the business objectives that we should be trying to achieve in solving this problem? And so what it looks like is, things like we want to improve time to value, or we want to improve customer engagement. Whatever the problem is, the business objectives will be, typically we'll start with an action verb like improvement or reduce churn or accelerate or simplify. It's less about, it's not about the solution. Again, it's about the objective. What is the business trying to achieve? And so I always coach folks to write their ideas down in terms of action verbs. And so what we'll do is we have a whole stack of sticky notes that we give the participants, and each participant writes down what they think the chief, business objectives would be. And then we get a whole bunch of them. It's basically a brainstorming activity, and we whack them to the wall. And then we have everyone take voting dots, which are, get them at the office supply store, and they're multicolored. We'll show an example of that. And we ask each person to basically put the green dot, or, depending on the number of objectives you have, multiple green dots on the objective that you think is the most important to achieve. And so it's a straw man poll, really, but it allows the team to think about what they think is the most important business objective. And so that once we do that, we take the top ones that we have identified, and those become what we call our top business objectives. One thing I want to back up on to kind of set the stage is, although that it's important to have in the room somebody who is what we call the decider. And the decider is often the highest ranking person in the room. And that could be a CPO, a chief product officer. It could be a product owner. It could be the CEO. It could be the COO. But it's usually somebody at the time, within the group of people that we have, the person with the most capacity and authority to authorize the decisions we make in this session. And we call them the decider because at the end of the day, somebody has to make a decision. Somebody has to give permission, and in most corporate structures, they're in such a way where somebody has to authorize money or approve a budget or, bless an initiative or something like that. And so one of the things that I like to say to that person before we start is, this is democratizing voice, but at the end of the day, it's not ruled by committee. The decider is the person who makes the decision to proceed or not to proceed. And so through all of this process, it's important to note that at the beginning, we identify who the decider is. And everybody in the room, what the decider is basically giving, it's a gift, is to everybody else in the room has equal opportunity to influence the decision that the decider is going to take. And so at the end of the day, in a lot of these tasks that you'll see, the decider will cast the deciding vote at the end. And it's basically what's wonderful about this process is the decider has to agree with or disagree with what his team is telling him. And he has to do it in front of them, which in corporate structure, often, how it is. It's like, a bunch of people, have one-on-one conversations with the person who has to make the decision. And then they feel disenfranchised when the person who makes the decision goes off and does something different. And in this case,
I think that's, I was going to say, I think that's an important point where in this process, you're going to just even not in this process, but in any process at a company, you're going to have somebody throwing a monkey wrench into maybe all the meetings and all the decisions your team has made when you finally present it to the CEO. We know of people that have very disruptive hierarchies like that, and that creates frustration within your team if you don't know why.
100%.
I mean, and so this process too, at the beginning, you've seen the scribble lines where we always explain this as a visual, where there's a lot of ideas that are coming on day one, and we're trying to like collapse those ideas into a nice tight funnel because they're going to be all over the place and the scope is just going to be very enormous. And so pinpointing what you need to focus on is really important at that beginning stage. So you're going to see a lot of jumping around and a lot of ideas getting thrown into here. And so our job is to really facilitate and make them understand this is part of the process. You get all the ideas out in your head, but we still have to start refining the scope of what we're actually focusing in on.
Yeah, absolutely. I wanted to talk about that because I want to make it clear that a lot of people say, well, I don't want to do this because it's ruled by committee. And it's not really ruled by committee. The committee it's a committee of advisors who are giving voice to what the decider should do. So at the end of the day, this first step in problem definition is, what is the business trying to achieve? And then so everybody casts a vote on what they think the top, business objective is. And then the decider says, okay, let's see. Okay, yes, I agree or I don't agree. And then they make the decision, or they agree with the team or they disagree. They can amend those objectives as they wish. And then the second part of the problem definition is, if we don't achieve these objectives, what would happen what's the cost of inaction? And then that's important to come up with, because it's important to know, it's important to rally around, why are we doing this work, or why are we solving this problem? And it lends credence to, rallying the troops around solving this problem by identifying what would happen if we don't do these things. Like, what's the cost of inaction? And in any lean canvas and any business problem, you want to identify that. And so that's the second question that we ask, like, what adverse effects are being created because the business has not achieved these objectives? Again, total business focus in this first session. And so same process. We'll vote on the top. Everyone brainstorms. We vote on the top adverse effects. The decider makes the final votes on those. And then the third question is, what opportunity, based on, now we've got top business objectives, and we've got our top adverse effects. And so based on those, what opportunities exist to change customer behavior if we were to address or take advantage of participate in addressing these business outcomes and these adverse effects? And so that gives everybody the chance to sort of say, oh, this is a holistic, you'd think optimistically about the future. And again, it's not about solution identification. It's more about saying, if we reduced churn, then the opportunity would be that, customers would, stay with our platform longer. They would develop higher quality relationships, optimistic statements like that. There's a fun way to kind of frame this. You can actually put it in the form of a question, like how might we increase customer loyalty? How might we make this platform more mission critical? That's up to the facilitator, and so that's the third step. And then the last step is, what would be the key success results for the business if we were successful in addressing the business objectives, the adverse effects, and took advantage of the key core opportunities that we've identified? And once you put all of those together, you've actually written a pretty effective problem statement. So here's an example of it. It says, we believe we'll achieve the following business objectives by improving our platform. And you can see in this example, we would accelerate growth, we would reduce churn and increase customer retention, and we would demonstrate thought leadership. Those are the top business objectives for improving this cybersecurity platform. And then the second part is by addressing the following adverse effects. We would go out of business if we didn't fix the churn. Churn would increase, and which would change customer behavior in the following ways. Well, if we do those things, we'll have more ARR, we'll have lower churn and higher margins for partners. It would increase customer confidence and would restore our credibility. And it would change an industry mindset in the eyes of the customer from one-off to continuous. In other words, customers will be behaving in different ways, better ways, based on addressing this problem. And then the last one, which is if anybody's been in the world of OKR, which is objectives and key results, this is a gift to that framework, because now we're going to get super tactical about. We will know if we're succeeding by, in this example, reduction in churn by 20% in Q1, or improving CSAT scores of X, because we don't know a value yet. GRR will be greater than 90%. NRR would be greater than 140%. Our growth rate increases 2 times. So it gives the team something to rally around success. Now, these values might change over the length of the project, but it gives the team something to really rally around and stake a flag in the ground as to what success looks like.
And that's day one.
So that's day one.
Based on, kind of the problem that we've identified in day one, we go about saying, okay, let's create a story today featuring these characters and explain to me where the problem you've identified in day one manifests itself. And we call it a journey map.